thank Charles and also Liza, who's working behind the scenes here, making this all work. So, and thanks for this opportunity. I've been associated with community action agencies in
Okay. Okay. All right, I'll put the video again. I know you're right.
I'm ready.
All right.
Okay, folks, can you hear us? I hope so. We've gone to alternate technology, i.e. a cell phone. We apologize for the interruption. As I was saying, and I hope you're hearing, I want to convince you or reassure you that strategic planning, developing strategy for a nonprofit organization is more than a necessary evil. It's really defining, it's clarifying, and believe it or not, it can be liberating and really great for an organization in terms of integration and team building and just getting done and getting to the next level. So we will chat with you about all of that today. I want to acknowledge that I've looked at your organizational standards, the partnership organizational standards, and the CAP Guide to Strategic Planning. I think they're excellent and really, really very relevant. And I know you all had a part in developing them and used them. So what I'm going to talk about is really focusing on three aspects, and I'll get to that in a moment. Liza, if you would go to the next slide. The why of it, you understand. I mean, part of the why of it in your case is it's required as a condition of funding for CSBG, but there are organizational reasons to do it anyway. And if you're kind of a blended agency, part CAP and part, I don't know, family service agency or senior service agency or youth agency or whatever, you have to be thinking of the whole organization, how it all comes together. So I use the term strategic planning and strategy development. I give you both because in some circles the idea of periodic strategic planning is viewed as sort of passé, that it's now about ongoing strategy development. You develop a strategy and you're constantly implementing it, revising it, and so forth. So however you think about it, at some point you need to do a plan. And these are the reasons that it's useful, and I think you know that, but it's more than a requirement of your funder. It's also an expectation of major donors, and I know that many community action agencies receive funds from the community. Major donors expect to see a plan and expect to see progress on the plan. It's also really good in terms of bringing about integration. If you've done it well and you've gone from being the provider of a range of programs to becoming an organization that has an overall purpose, it gives you an opportunity to think about marketing, to think about strategy, to think about everything that you do across the silos that develop in all organizations. It's, it's a condition, part of the human condition, that we create our turf and we specialize and so forth, and we're in this department and those people are in other departments. A good strategic plan provides an opportunity to really integrate. Next slide, please. So the question I'm asking, or really multiple questions, but does strategic planning in sort of the classic sense, does it really provide all those things? Does it really provide clarity? Or is it just a bunch of goals? If you look up strategic planning and you look up the definition, there are a zillion different definitions, but mostly they say it's about defining goals for the organization going into the future. And it's more than that. The question is it objective and data-driven, or is it subjective? Is it just groupthink? Is it really just about the result of a retreat, or is it informed by outside? Is it inclusive? And as I'll talk about in a few minutes, we know that sometimes those who actually participate in the planning are a really narrow segment of your constituencies. Is it that? You could go back a slide. That would be helpful. No, I guess go forward. Sorry about that. This is it. The question is strategic planning a ritual or is it relevant? Because relevancy is what we want to achieve. Is it formulaic? Okay, we've done the 13 steps that some book told us that we needed to do. Or is it formative? Is it really setting the direction? Is it really creating the organization? Even if the organization is 50, 60, or 150 years old, it's continuing to form and create. Is it codifying? In other words, does it just take existing activities and give goals to them and sort of give them legitimacy? Or is it defining? At the end of the day, do you say, oh, well, this agency of Keokuk, Iowa is really about whatever it is, building community, empowering people. Is it really about that in such a way that everybody in the organization knows that that purpose is part of their purpose? Is it predictable or is it hard-hitting? It can be an opportunity to say, we're a great organization, we've been around for a lot of years, the world has changed though, and are we changing? Is the marketplace changing? Are there different expectations of it? Are we going beyond? Is it hard-hitting? So this is kind of by the book, and I'm not going to spend much time on it. These are sort of the elements that are typically, or kind of the frame of a typical plan. The leadership is primarily the CEO, or if you're really large, your VP for strategy, and the board. The classic elements, I'll get into that. Staff engagement, I hate to say, is often really limited. Sometimes it's, and you know whether this is true for your organization or not, sometimes it's sort of a really cool retreat at the beginning, and then 9 months later, some plan comes out, and the staff haven't heard anything all along. Often it's led by a hired gun, a third party. I can't be too critical since I am one. The time frame can be extended. I don't think it needs to be. Often, and I think this is a danger sign, the board retreat is really the culmination. It's like that's where everything happens. And there are real problems with that. Good that there would be a retreat, but a good plan needs to be informed by inputs and data all along, not all at one thing, where opinion may rise to the surface. The product is often kind of a big deal and hard to follow because it's a lot of stuff. And then the follow-through is usually the responsibility of the senior team and or the board. In fact, often the plan is essentially alive for the CEO and the board and not so much other people. We want to correct all those things. We want to make it better. Next slide, please. So these are the classic elements, and look through the Partnership Guide to Strategic Planning, and you'll see something very similar to this. You got to plan the process, decide what it's going to be like. You do what we call an environmental scan. I'm going to suggest a different way of thinking about that. You look at external data and you look at internal data and inputs. You identify the key issues. You bring up the core values, vision, and mission. I'm going to suggest a change in that as well. You develop your goals. You reach some consensus, and then you develop your plan. So you're familiar with those. You've gone through it. There are 1,000 variations on the same theme, but those are the core elements. Next, please. So what's wrong with that? Those are all good. That's all a good thing. But the shortcomings are that often the planning process is not really purposeful about who to engage in the process and how to involve them. So, I mean, at the end of the day, or at the end of the planning process, you want all the stakeholders, all the stakeholder groups to really own the plan. And that doesn't happen if we haven't been very purposeful, deliberate, and inclusive about engagement in the plan. The environmental factors, and I am a longtime student of strategic planning. When I first learned about environmental scanning, I thought, oh, how cool. And you're looking at the politics, you're looking at government, you're looking at the economy and on a lot of things. But sometimes they're like at 50,000 feet, and your reality's at 5,000 feet. So we're often not looking at things that are very unique and particular to the marketplace in which your organization operates. I'm going to suggest how we can do that. The internal assessment is often kind of us talking to us. And are we the best ones to do that? And you can get at that by your inclusion strategy. But really having some humility and understanding that because we think the agency is the best thing since sliced bread doesn't mean that it is. Maybe people are getting their bread elsewhere and they don't want it sliced. Or thinner slices, whatever. You can beat that metaphor to death. The values, vision, and mission are often a part of the plan, but they're often treated as immutable, unchangeable, that they're given from on high, from our history, and we might tweak the mission and vision a little bit, but maybe they need to be restated and changed. And maybe your analysis will say, geez, we said our mission was to protect birds when it really is to save the environment. And you should be able to revise the values, vision, and mission, and maybe reaffirm many of them. And then the goals and strategies, and this is my personal bias as a longtime CEO, are often like so overwhelming. There are so many of them. There are so many efforts. They tend to increase the fragmentation across the silos of the organization because everybody's working on a lot of individual things. What if we had 3, 5, 6 big things that everybody was working on and had a piece of, and they needed, as would be the case, to relate to 2 or 3 other units, departments, committees, boards, partner organizations to make it possible. Things get done by groups, not by individuals in organizations. So do we have that opportunity? So these are all aspects of the plan that can go awry very naturally and very commonly. And how can we prevent that? Next slide, please. So I think there are 3 elements that really can change the calculus. And they're in the CAP guide in different ways, but I'm suggesting kind of a deeper dive on these 3 things. Next slide. One is what I call strategic engagement. And it's about, I'll go into this in more detail, but it's really about pulling together all the hands that need to be pulled together to make this assessment, to set these goals, and to implement strategy for your organization. The second is, next slide please, a marketplace or competitive analysis. I see this as sort of a replacement for the environmental scan. It's similar but not entirely the same, but it's closer to your reality. It's looking at the Community Action Agency of Keokuk, Iowa. Apologies, Keokuk, Iowa. That's not the name of your organization, but you're looking at your community, the realities that you live with, not the national economy and the national politics and so forth. You know, let's face it, you may love or hate, probably not love, national policy relative to human services and community development these days, but the reality that you live with is primarily decided at the state and local level. So it's really looking at things on that basis. And I'll get more into this. I think actually this is the most exciting part of it. And then the third element that I think you take a deeper dive on is, I wish you were here that I could see your faces and see how many of you knew, know, read, used Good to Great in the social sectors. I'll talk more about that, but I learned enough. I have to say I came kicking and screaming to an appreciation of the value of this work, but I think it's so much more valuable than the typical SWOT analysis. So now I'm going to go into each of these three in a bit more depth, as much depth as we're going to get in a brief webinar, but you have the opportunity to ask questions afterwards. So see the little symbol of all the hands, that will be on the slides relating to the strategic engagement piece. And that's, you know, obviously, who are your internal clients? Clients, potential clients, families of clients. I have to share, and you see the other lists, and you can probably think of others. And sometimes you want to talk to these groups individually because they have different perspectives, and people might say different things when the CEO is not present or the board's not present. The CEO might say things differently than if the board's present and the staff and so forth. But one thing, I was engaged in a strategic planning process for a wonderful agency recently, and asked about aging services, you know, who would they ask? And they said, well, of course, our aging clients. And I said, really? How do those clients get to you? Does an older person call you and say, I want you to provide home care services, or I want transportation services? Well, not most of them was the answer. I said, well, then who really does call you? Oh, adult children, particularly daughters and daughters-in-law, but often sons and sons-in-law as well. So we need not just to ask the seniors in that program how they perceive it, but the agency, but we also need to ask their family members, because they're the ones who are actually bringing in the quote-unquote business. Next piece on strategic engagement. And this is sort of a parenthetical piece, and Charles and I have worked together a good bit, and so he's going to recognize this. In any planning process, I have learned that you've got to look for special people who are going to help move the process along. And these are some of the characteristics that you need to look for. You may be that person, but it's really helpful to have a variety of people in the planning process who bring it forward. Who are those people really good at synthesizing diverse inputs, who don't come to the table with a, gee, what I think we ought to do is blank and never move off of that, but listen to the inputs, listen to the data, read it all, understand it, synthesize it, and then conceptualize. Oh, well, if these conditions have changed and our capacity is X, Y, Z, then here are our options. We continue to do what we, for example, we continue to do what we do. We eliminate something, we add something new, we integrate programs differently, whatever it is. I also think it's helpful to have people who can think beyond the existing solutions and programs. If you do a plan and you've got 10 programs, and at the end of the day, at the end of the plan, you've got the same 10 programs codified, maybe you haven't thought very expansively. It could be right. And then a skill I learned in United Way work a zillion years ago, it's really helpful to have people who are going to move the process along, who are going to say, whether the person is the chair of a committee or what, we're going to say, okay, we've talked about that. Now let's make a decision based on that, even if we can modify it later. Okay, so that's a parenthetical. And then there's another piece I wanted to share on stakeholders. The externals, very, very important. One of the larger weaknesses of strategic plans is that they're very insular. They're us talking to us about how great we are, and if only everybody understood that, particularly our funders. Where it's really, really helpful to go to these other sources and say, well, you know, we've been in business for a long time. What's your impression of us? When you hear the name of Community Action of Keokuk, Iowa, what comes to mind? What are other organizations you think of that are better than us? What is it that you think we contribute uniquely to the community? Those kinds of questions. So really ask those other sources. Again, an anecdote in a planning process with the National Assembly a few years ago, we had a consultant go and speak to funders who should be our funders, but they weren't, and say, what do you think about them? In a couple of cases, we had the sobering realization that they thought nothing because they didn't know us. But asking the question opened the door, and we ended up getting quite a bit of funding from one of those organizations. Then we move on to the second area of deep diving. Oh, I'm sorry, one more here. This is really just trying to think of how are you going to get input from this group. One of the things that I believe in strongly, having worked in resource-strapped organizations my whole life, is that we don't have a lot of time and money and expertise to do all of this research. But we can look for easy ways of getting it. Are there some documents that perhaps the county already pulls together, or the counties, that we can get input from? But also, you know, are there some shorthand things to do? Can we pull together a focus group of adult children, of aging adults, and then thinking of what's the most feasible way of doing it in a way that's standardized, so that you're getting, if you're asking a bunch of funders, all the funders are being asked the same thing, so that it's really comparative. So it's really trying to find a pragmatic way of getting input from these key constituencies. Next, please. And then you pause. I hit pause, the pause button, a few times in here. Pause because it's good to stop and reflect, however you do it, as a staff group, as a staff and committee, and say, okay, we did that strategic input thing. What did we learn from it? And then kind of hold that information as we move on to the next section, which is the marketplace analysis. Again, there are internal and external aspects. And you've done this kind of thing, but it's really pulling together the demographics. Who do you serve? And how do those compare to that population in your community? Like, you know, what's your penetration of that population? Is there more opportunity? Who are your constituents and supporters? And if you can find out indicators of their needs and expectations, that's really great. That's important. Service delivery, you want to look at data like utilization by service over 5 years. I suggest 5 years, 3 years may be too little. You want to look at any consumer feedback mechanisms that you've got. If you've got an evaluation process, that's helpful. And then revenue, you want to look at least these 4 buckets of revenue. Revenue that's self-generated, revenue that's fee-generated, government grants and contracts, and philanthropic. Again, a little anecdote. One organization I've been working with, the perception of the board, all of whom are volunteers, was that this enterprise was driven primarily by donor dollars. And it was only through the planning process that they came to realize it was really only about 20% of the funding was from donors. Very important, but kind of important to spend a lot of attention on fee generation and government grants in this case, and in most cases, and pursue the philanthropic, but understand, where's your bread and butter. Next slide, please. And then look at expenses by program function over the years, but consider your fundraising costs, your development costs, and all of that, your overhead, and if you categorize it, your program development, evaluation, and innovation costs. If you categorize those, you should at least have program development and evaluation. It's really understanding so that you can look at these data and say, what are they telling us? Is this program losing money? Are we spending more money on this program than we're bringing in? That's not necessarily a bad thing. It could be a reality. But do we need other sources of revenue that even out that shortfall? Next, please. And then we look at a more external view, and some of this we do from our strategic engagement, is getting input, but also looking to see where are things heading. Is there a new plan, or are there plans in state government, in county government, in metropolitan area councils, or whatever, that say, this is where we in our community are trying to get. We're trying to reduce the number of, say, out-of-home placements of children by X%. And if you provide children's services, you need to know that and you need to incorporate it. One of the most liberating things that I can recommend, and I'm not going into it deeply here, but you can Google it, is the idea of competitive analysis. I would look at competitive analyses in the nonprofit sector. At my last organization, we were always fretting about the competition. But there were two organizations in particular, three. But when we did the analysis, and the analysis identified those organizations that are in some way competitive, even though we're often collaborative with them. But we looked at them about who are their constituencies, what do they actually do, what's their purpose, all those things. We could clearly identify how we were different from all of them. One was mainly public agencies, and we were mainly not-for-profit. One was any kind of 501c3. We were only human service national, and so forth. And doing that put to rest some of those questions, like should we pay dues to you and to independent sector and to the National Health Council? Well, maybe you should. But if you want to focus on human services as a part of a coalition of national nonprofits, you belong to us. And we're not opposed to you being involved in those other organizations. We are too. They have different purposes. They have different constituents and so forth. And then I think very, very importantly, I've alluded to this before, is what's the state of the art in your field? And the classic is, maybe you've always been a provider of foster care and residential care for kids, and the continuum of the trend is moving away from residential facilities into more community-based care and more family-based care. Are you moving with those trends? And of course, as a network, you have the benefit of community action partnership, because you can go to CAP for that kind of literature or that kind of knowledge, and you pick it up as you go to conferences and so forth. But it's really looking at what are all what's the growing trend? What's the wave? What's the evidence say about what we should be doing? Anti-poverty strategies today are different than those 50 years ago. And what has the research found? Again, I know I'm preaching to the choir here because I'm sure you do this, but it's I'm going to say this, one more time. The marketplace competitive analysis that I recommend is much more specific to your industry and your locality and your constituency than a typical environmental scan. Next slide, please. Again, we hit the pause button and we say, what does that all tell us? I gave you the example about how the competitive analysis was clarifying for the National Assembly a number of years ago, still is. What have we learned from all of this? We're providing XYZ models of services, and the current trend is X2. And we have to evaluate, should we be there as part of our plan to get there, or are we already there? And then the third piece of it is good to great. And I think, I suspect you've read the book, probably 15 years old. You read the original, which compared a lot of, major corporations and why they're making the leap and other companies don't. Authored by Jim Collins, who's also the author of Built to Last, also a good book. But he was encouraged by Francis Hesselbein, then of the Drucker Institute, and others to relate it to nonprofit organizations, or what they chose to call social sectors. Not my choice of words, but, and it's really cool stuff. It gets a little esoteric. It talks, about things like the hedgehog concept. And I could explain it to you, but I don't really want to. I learned to live with this without getting into those things, but there are pieces that are so relevant to nonprofits. And these are the three pieces. What, as an organization, are you deeply passionate about? And this needs not to be a list of 15 things. What are the core 2, 3, 5 things that your organization is really deeply passionate about? When was the last time we asked that question? What do you want to be, I love this phrase, best in the world at? Well, since your marketplace is not the world, you want to be the best in your industry, or you want to be the best in your community at this collection of things that you do at your community action agency or your broader agency. And then, very importantly, what drives your economic engine? I gave the example earlier of a service that was really driven by adult children of frail elderly people. That's a big driver. In that same vein, insurance, Medicaid are big drivers. How are we doing on time? Okay. Are big drivers as well. And I apologize for giving a short shrift. I found this so useful, and I think the National Assembly did. We found it so clarifying when we took, in this case, an association of national nonprofits. What is it we were deeply passionate about? And when we got into that, and we really hashed it out with the staff, with key constituencies, with funders, with the board, we realized it was really about improving the effectiveness of human services in the United States. It wasn't about only delivering services to members, which is an important thing, but the most passionate thing was about improving the impact of our social interventions. What could we be best in the world at, and across our resources? So sorry. Some sort of feedback there. Okay, and then we can move on. And I hope you can hear us.
No, it's not letting me get that.
But we're getting the sound through here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
You're just coming through.
You know, then we got some weird feedback.
Apologies, everyone.
So I muted us from feedback.
Technology is not always our friend.
So I don't know why. Let's see.
Try right-clicking to see if it brings up. It looks like we're good.
Okay.
Okay, are we good? Let us hope so. We're nearing the end, and I hope you have some questions, and we're able to exchange so that you can. Okay, Liza can move to the next slide. Again, pause. What do we learn from this good to great? And then you won't see it, but in the copies of the slides that you get, you'll see another pause button. And then we move back to, I think, go ahead. There you go. And then it's a matter of taking those three buckets of inputs and data, advice and counsel, research, and weaving it together. Again, we were trying to make sure we included people who have those conceptual and synthesizing capabilities. But it is, in my opinion, kind of a weaving together of those three buckets of the input and feedback that we got through the strategic engagement, of the marketplace analysis that we did. How is the marketplace changing? What does that tell us? And the third piece is how we, what are we really competent at, and what are we really striving to do as an organization? It's really weaving it together, and as the image suggests, it's really a multifaceted fabric or rope that needs to be woven together, and it needs all to relate. At the end of the day, you want to be able to say a few things about your organization and its direction, not only a litany of 43 action steps that need to be undertaken. So that's kind of the overview of this analysis. Are we losing it all together?
No, we're okay.
Okay. And it's really now up to you. At some point, I don't know if it's on your screen, but we'll have a slide of my name and email address. I welcome you contacting me, and also I post things on my LinkedIn presence that are kind of, I don't post a lot, but if you're interested, you're welcome. If you would like to go back one slide. So we could have started with the definition, and we sort of did, but I wanted you to think about this kind of definition, which is slightly different than many of them. It's really about setting the organization's sights and its course to maximize impact, sustainability, and fulfillment of mission. And I have to say that often the sustainability aspect is not considered. And it's a really important piece of what we need to do, maximizing impact, sustainability, and fulfillment of mission. It's not just about articulating and enumerating some goals and strategies and action plans and blah, blah, blah. Those are part of it if the end result of what you're trying to achieve is to maximize impact, sustainability, and fulfillment of mission. With that, we can go to the last slide again, and hopefully you'll contact me, and we'd be happy to take, or I'd be happy to take questions and comments, I should say. We're checking to see if there are any in the comment box. If they're not, please put them down.
Hello?
Yes.
I'm sorry. I don't know, for some reason it quit working through the webinar, so I didn't hear your last few comments. But one question I have.
Oh no, we lost you. Can you,
If people have questions, we encourage you to use the chat box function. Everybody is muted just so we can cut back on feedback noise. So if you do have a question, whoever was previously speaking, if you want to type that question in the chat box, we'll be able to answer you there. And we are
again, please type in your questions in the chat box.
And so we have a question, will slides be available? So the slides will be available on the partnership website. We'll have a copy of this recording and the slides that you can download. And you can also just shoot Irv an email directly at his address up on the screen, or you can just get in contact with the partnership as well. And also just want to mention that Irv does do consultation on strategic planning. We are adding him to our list of consultants in our CFDG TTA Resource Center. But if you wanted to follow up with Irv directly, again, you can either shoot him an email or let me know and I'll put you in touch with him.
And it looks like we do have a few questions coming here. First, the first question was related to your presentation, Irv, and that was how long do you think a solid process should take?
Sure. I think it really varies with the size of the organization. You know, if it's a smaller number of programs, it's maybe a budget of under $1 million or something like that. $1 million still sounds like a lot of money to me. That, you know, maybe you want to be as ambitious as trying to do it in 6 months. Otherwise, it's probably going to take 9 months to a year to be realistic. I mean, that's given the fact that you've got other things to do. Part of what I espouse is that you look for existing sources of information as much as possible. You look for ways of streamlining processing and data collection so that the process is not elongated. And one thing I should mention that I think is important, however long the process is for the people who are leading the process to have some sort of feedback, not feedback, but continuous communications, like here's where we are in the process and here how it's progressing, so that you break up that phenomenon of having a convening and then 9 or 10 or 12 months later have these goals appear and you wonder, how did they get to that? It's good to bring people along the way.
Right, and another question here is, for small caps, it's about 98% federally funded. How do you move staff and board to think beyond the existing program?
That's a really good question. I think when you think about what you want to be really the best in the world at and what you're really passionate about, and you say, let's put existing programs on hold. They're there. But say, what is it that we're really trying to accomplish? Ask those big questions. Look at sources like what's going on in your industry. Have people gone from X kinds of practices to Y kinds of practices? And is there evidence to indicate that's important? It's ask the big questions, but do it in an environment where people are given permission to not defend the existing. I'm not saying we're going to throw out the existing, but give them permission to think differently. And again, try to include people in the process who have sufficient personal or positional power who can say, yeah, we could do something different, or we could, let's think outside the box or outside the bun, I guess as Taco Bell calls it. Other questions?
Just a general comment, a lot of people have been posing questions related to the fact that they might not be able to see this last slide with IRB's contact information. And as I said, we will be sharing these entire slides on our website, and so you'll be able to find his contact information on the last slide on the website. And I have also shared his email address in the chat box, so you guys can look to the chat box to see that contact information as well.
Thank you, Eliza. And Jarl, I appreciate your giving a little, you're pointing out that I do consulting. I am really passionate about helping organizations find strategic clarity. So I am happy to do this kind of assistance. I'm open to doing really limited consultations, even just to help get you going or to help you ask the right question. I don't think this needs to be expensive. The important thing is, at the end of the day, have you differentiated your agency? Have you created enthusiasm among the stakeholders for what you do and what you want to become? Has this effort become clarified? And will it make your organization more sustainable? With the example of the organization that was 98% CDB, Community Services Block Grant, federal funding, maybe you'll find some relevant roles and partners to move that will suggest you move to other sources of funding as well.
There's one more comment here, too, that we might be able to speak on. One big struggle for our subs is asking the right questions that allow for identifying the cause of the need, not just the condition.
That's, again, also a wonderful question. It's, and often I think this is where we have to look at the outside expertise. One document that some social service agencies, community development agencies are looking these days are at the local health assessment documents because those get into broader needs, and it's really looking at those big questions. But yeah, and go to the literature. Every town has got a university nearby with some sort of relevant specialization. You can go to key faculty or key researchers and say, we're trying to find the documentation for the conditions here, not just the specific needs. So I think it's try to find those secondary sources that will answer these, help you answer these key questions. You've got to really knock the socks off of funders if you get them off of those knee-jerk questioning of, how are you addressing the underlying conditions to really demonstrating the knowledge of those conditions and demonstrating that the world has changed as to how we address those conditions. And I'm very proud of the quote-unquote social sector, as I call it, the civic sector, because we've increasingly moved away from thinking that our programs are the only solution. As you well know, in CAP, housing and jobs, economic advancement, those kinds of things are very important, and we provide supportive things, but we may not provide those core things themselves. I think we're maybe running out of steam.
Yep, so we don't see any other questions coming in. So again, I wanted to thank IRB for coming in and doing this webinar this afternoon. And again, the slides and the webinar recording will be available on the partnership's website. And if you have any follow-up questions, you can either direct them directly to IRB or myself. And otherwise, thank you again for turning out for this afternoon's webinar. Hope to see you all at our annual convention in Philly in a couple of weeks. And I will probably see many of you on the road. So thank you all again. Have a great week, and hope to see you in Philly in a few weeks. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.